This is the Cloud Security Today podcast, where leaders learn how to get cloud security done. And now your host, Matt Chiodi.
Data security is one of those topics that listeners have been asking me for months to do on the show. And at first I thought, man, we've covered this before. But after I looked at the last 3.5 years of podcasts, I realized, as usual, my listeners are right. So on today's episode, we are going to talk about data security and specifically data security in the cloud. And I wanted to bring on someone who could look at this not from a vendor perspective, but from a governance, risk, and compliance perspective. And I could think of no one better than Ashish Suri. Now, Ashish, I love his experience. And yes, I'm always a sucker for someone who's worked at places like Apple, VMware, eBay, Visa, etc., because these are all companies that are known for innovation. And that typically means the people that work there are innovative. And so Ashish and I, we talk over this topic, and yes, you'll love this because we only talk about it from a vendor perspective for about 3 minutes. We really focus on people and process, and then at the end, get into the technology side. I hope you enjoy the episode. Ashish, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me here.
This is going to be fascinating. I love your background. And immediately I want to go to your role that you had at Apple. Tell me this. So you were the head of data risk for enterprise and new product security. When you think about your 3-year tenure there, what are you most proud of?
If I was to go back in my previous life of what I have done, coming from a background of compliance and then working with some of the fintech organizations like Visa or PayPal, and then landing I would say, very surprising role at Apple, which was all to do with data secrecy. I would say my 3 years taught me a lot around data secrecy. That's number one. And actually dealing with data secrecy dovetailed with supply chain. Now, we are not talking about the software supply chain. We are talking about the actual product supply chain, a manufacturing vertical-based supply chain where the products are being made, the products are being developed, the products are being designed, and then you have a go-to-market for those products. So a lot went in those 3 years, or I would say 3+ years of having me look into what is the actual core crown jewel information that we are trying to protect during the journey of a product, right from a design state to the final stage where it reaches the end consumer. So I think I would say protecting that information right from the schematics of the products that are being designed, which will be absolutely brand new and probably trying to revolutionize the market space in which they are going to be sold, was probably the most intriguing aspect of my stay with Apple. A lot went in terms of dealing with the third parties who are your partners, developing prototypes on those schematics, developing, I would say, products in various stages of its life cycle. And how do you protect the crown jewel information that could be, the algorithm, could be software, could be a camera, could be any of those things that are, pretty much brand new that the market has never seen. And you're trying to protect that information. So that's the data secrecy element of it. And obviously, after data secrecy comes the data security aspect of it, because you're now trying to protect the actual nuts and bolts of those products that make that product tick and compete in the market space. So I think combining those two elements together of secrecy and security was probably the biggest learning experience for me.
I love that. And you're the first one I've spoken to has really made that distinction between data security and data secrecy. Maybe let's just double click on that just for a minute.
Sure.
Give us what is the real difference between data secrecy versus data security? How do you define that? How do you look at it?
For me, the data secrecy means what probably we are trying to keep under wrap from the public view For example, if I was to come up with a particular product that has not been introduced in the market space, how do I keep the schematics of that particular product from being stolen by a competitor? Or if I'm trying to make a prototype or some sort of a beta state testing that's going on for that product, how do I keep the information contained before it leaks out? Now, that is where I'm trying to be very secretive about a particular product that should not get leaked in terms of its nuts and bolts, you can say. Whereas now the data security is, I could be having a code that I am developing that would create some sort of maybe an operating mechanism for that particular product that is unique in its way. It could be an algorithm that is collecting some third-party data or data for some sort of intelligence and then processing that data. Now, I'm protecting that aspect from a data security perspective. So it could be, let's say, for example, if we take today some of these autonomous technology platform where, there are these cars that are collecting data. Now, that data is being used by the algorithms, which we now have kind of termed them as LLMs or whatever language models that we are creating. Now, that's processing that data. So you want to protect those LLMs or those algorithms and keep them secure in your environment. And that could be from inside a threat or from any attacks that are happening on your environment. Whereas the data secrecy could be, how are you designing some of the elements to collect that data that could be unique to that particular platform? So you are protecting that, and from the aspect of data secrecy, I would hold that as a crown jewel information and want to remain secretive about it. That's how I will distinguish between data secrecy and data security.
That's helpful. I appreciate that. So, looking at your background, you've been a GRC professional for a number of years. And I think looking over my guest history, you may actually be the first true GRC person that I've had on. So I'm really curious to dig into your lens on this. But how do you, when you look at the cloud from a risk perspective, where does data security fit into that?
I would answer this question in three parts. First one is, as companies have shifted to cloud first, the attack surface, especially with multi-cloud, and data volume has accelerated. I mean, you're looking at starting from good old days when we dealt with some bytes of data, and now we are talking about petabytes, and I do not know how or where we are going with the usage of these, I would say specific words that are being coined, in terms of the storage space as such. So, from that perspective, I would say, in fact, Gen AI is also accelerating that. That's number one. Number two is, we are talking about the risk, which has come up not just from adversaries, but also from insider threats, regulators, and risk too from customers or partners or suppliers. So your ecosystem is also basically increasing, where no longer the risk is contained at one particular register, but that register has multiplied because of all the components that are becoming part of this ecosystem. We are extending that ecosystem to now different levels altogether. Then the third one is, although it remains challenging to be cost effective, but understanding our risks is the key out here. The precision with which we have to deal with risks and not interrupt the business with any kind of a friction has become an important ingredient to look at the cloud from a risk perspective. So in a nutshell, I would say the more we are out there in the cloud, the larger our footprint becomes, and the risk continues to multiply in different directions. So we really need to know how we operate, what we want to operate, and how do we control the operation of our services so that we can understand our risks in that ecosystem.
How did your time at Apple influence your approach to data security and your role at VMware? I think having that background, I think it's unique. Like, what did you take from it, and how does it influence your current role and your role at VMware?
I think all my previous experiences, including Apple, has played a very vital role as I have progressed in my career. Right from, I would say, Big Four days when I dealt with compliance predominantly, and then switching from compliance, which was very assurance-driven function, to the advisory side of the house, which was very open in terms of what the end client was looking for and how we could basically provide them with our services. But at the end of the day, everything concluded at one point, which was understanding the risk from a business perspective. You have to understand what business a client is in, what are the different risks of operating or conducting that business, and how do we provide security, into that space. Apple was none different, I would say, because yes, they are into consumer goods. You are dealing with hardware, you are dealing with software, then venturing out into some of the new areas that they wanted to experiment. Some worked, some did not work. I think at the end of the day, for any professional to say that he knows everything about data security, I would take it with a big pinch of salt there. I think data security is very, very relevant to your profession in which you are and how you are looking at the risk and how you're providing security. So for me, if I would say that I learned a lot, absolutely. There was influence. I would say yes and no to some extent. But I think the role that I played at VMware was very much focused on the cloud delivered services. The objectives were very clear. We want to be very nimble. We should be able to basically jump into the AWSs of the world or GCPs of the world, and then provide our applications or our services to the end customer. And I think that's where the data security came into picture as to what exactly are we protecting depending on the type of customer who's consuming my services. In certain cases, it was important when we went into the public space where we are dealing with FedRAMP compliance requirements, DoD requirements, or CMMC requirements, or the executive orders, of the world. And then on the flip side, the moment we went global and started dealing with the agencies of the specific government in those locations, ISMAP of Japan came into picture, or IRAP of Australia came into picture. You're dealing with the requirements of Italian government that, hey, you have to have a CSP, cloud services provider, ISO 9001. Now, predominantly, we have heard 9001 is very manufacturing-oriented ISO certification, but now we had to basically get creative and understand how do we get a CSP through the rigor of ISO 9001. So I think data security takes a formation, or I would say it's like it kind of dovetails with the kind of business you are in and the kind of risks you identify in that business, and then you put adequate measures around data security or to secure that data for that particular business. So I would say Apple did play that role. I definitely used a lot of learnings coming in from a supply chain perspective, and the data exchange that was happening between the Apple and its partners globally. How do we protect that information? How do we make sure some of the privacy elements that we had to deal with some of the governments dealing in the Far East where the manufacturing was being done, and how do we protect that information? So I think all those elements assisted me to better structure my security measures as part of my governance, risk, and compliance role that I played at VMware. Sorry.
So many, most, let's say, organizations with any level of scale, especially in the cloud, they typically have a data security program. And I've even seen them that have it specific to cloud. All right. They recognize that they've got these two large silos at a high level of data, and they've put a specific practice in place. I guess from your perspective, from a GRC side, like what does the business get out of a data security program, right? We tend to think of data security as being, so abstracted from the business, right? They live on the data, but the security of it, like that's all just part of a security program, et cetera. But what does the business get out of it besides the obvious of, staying out of the news? Like, how do you look at that?
It's a good question. I think for every business, data security or security as such means very different. It could be a retailer who is using a service where it's a combination of some cameras running with some sort of algorithm, trying to give them some real-time feed and telling them, hey, by the way, I can detect some sort of anomaly in terms of the customer behavior in the store. Somebody may be trying to go back and forth, trying to get certain things or try to take those things out of the store. But then I also look at it from another customer, or maybe other customers or other verticals where technology has accelerated so fast that even in the past year, there is no reason not to be able to assess risk across our entire cloud estate for all our data fast and very cost efficiently. So be open to new methods and technology and shift away from a typical old school DLP rule-based style data security approaches. Like, you have to be really creative in terms of understanding your ecosystem, landscape, the kind of partners you have, the kind of vendors you have. How do you basically want to secure yourself? So that, I would say, will be, again, a very, very business objective driven. What exactly is the kind of business we are in? Then the other one is the risk thresholds will also vary based on the line of business, industry, geography, etc. So we have to have a good understanding in real time, if possible, of where the data is, who is using it, and then overlay the business understanding of that data in terms of its materiality to determine risk as such. So one can argue that, like I was giving an example of a solution being provided to a retail industry where it's a combination of hardware and software that deters a particular action or a loss of business for that particular retailer in a certain way, versus a cloud security provider who has a service and he wants to make sure that the customer data remains intact from any kind of leaks, as well as availability is prime for that particular service to the customer. So I think a combination of all these things are, I would say, what business is looking to get out of data security and the best practices of how good data security should be for a business. And I always say there is no one cookie cutter approach. Yeah, there are few best practices available that one can follow, but one has to tweak it based on what the business is all about.
So we're going to talk about tools in a minute. I know that's where security practitioners also often love to go first, is talk about tools.
Yeah.
But one of my favorite quotes is from Bruce Schneier, who said, "Security is a process, not a product." Right. And so when I kind of came up through security a number of years ago, we talked very much about the CIA Triad, right? The confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Mm-hmm. So from your perspective, where does that lens of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, how do you apply that like in a risk framework, right? Because often the questions that I hear from the clients that I deal with is that they feel like they are just relying on a tool and they don't have like a framework by which to apply it. So just kind of a broad question, but like, how do you think about it in terms of frameworks in data security?
I think the general view around the frameworks is that their foundation is all built on this triad, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So for me, when I look at different frameworks, I don't analyze those frameworks, but I look at the business that you are in, or if I'm providing a consulting service, I ask first thing, so what is the type of business one is in? If you are a typical cloud services provider, probably the availability is the biggest one, because if you do not have the availability, then customer cannot consume your services. When a customer cannot consume your services, it impacts your revenue in a very, very direct way. Now, availability has to be there. Now, on top of that, a combination of confidentiality and integrity in the form of securing that particular service has to be offered to that customer. Now, customer may be responsible for its own data at the end of the day. You are just a service provider, but you still want to provide a tech stack to a customer which doesn't have any backdoors, which is vulnerability free. You want to make sure that the transactions that are happening with the end customer through your service are secure. You have basic elements of encryption, multi-factor authentication, some of the other best I would say, security practices ingrained into your tech stack when you provide that service. So one can, it's like an onion. We can keep on peeling and we can keep on going deeper and deeper and deeper, and we will definitely hit the foundation where one could say that, hey, did I use the right measures? Did I use the right tools when I built this product? The code that I wrote, the environment in which I wrote, the people who had access or the ability to develop that code. And then that code basically was assisted with some sort of tools to migrate from the dev tests into a production environment. Now, how do you secure the production environment, which could again be going back to our previous question, depending on the type of ecosystem that we have created, where one cloud service provider may be using another cloud service provider for its services, and then they are amalgamation of many services together being offered to the end customers. They all become part of that ecosystem. Hopefully, I've answered that question, what you asked in terms of the CIA and the foundational frameworks as such. There are many frameworks. I think in my 20 plus years of lifespan of having dealt with governance, risk, and compliance, I would say I've seen the latest and the greatest, but the fundamental building blocks still remain the same. Identification of right risks, performing the right risk assessment, and then putting the right set of controls, preventative as many as possible, as much as possible by design, and then basically the detective controls. So for me, people may say it's a little old school, but I would say it's still the foundational world that we are in. And even if AI comes in tomorrow, it still needs to rely on the foundation of these frameworks.
When you look at AI, where do you see it fitting as part of a cloud data security strategy? Is it AI protecting the infrastructure and data, or is it AI as part of the tool set security and GRC uses to monitor and protect the data? How do you see that?
Fundamentally, there is no one way to accurately scale security and risk programs manually or via fragmented sets of tools and processes, which frankly most enterprises have been doing. This has led to a number of poor outcomes, hence the recent surge in legislation and other regulatory oversights. So AI that can do the work for you, not just a co-pilot, but actually understand your environment, the data, its materiality, and then recommend actions. That is a way to handle the speed and scale that Gen AI and other apps are generating data. Now, that's one aspect of it. I think there's also some concern around how Gen AI models are trained and if there is info leakage. It's very, very challenging to determine if a LLM model output will leak sensitive data, as we cannot easily determine their training data set. So really, if we treat Gen AI training data as other data in the org, we can ring fence or set boundaries on how data should be used and then let AI-based tools reason what needs to happen. Last but not the least, I would say there is an element of how to protect your AI stack itself, but that is more of a traditional vulnerability security approach we use with cloud workloads and other infra anyway. So at this point in time, when I go back to the question that you asked in terms of whether AI is protecting the infrastructure and data or AI is part of the tool set, there is no one definitive answer. It again goes back to the original discussion as to one, what business an organization is in, what types of processes that it uses to generate a service or a product, and how it is deeming AI to fit into their business model as such. And then comes the element of looking at and answering a question whether it's protecting the infrastructure and data or is it part of the tool set. I mean, I can use it both ways if I want to, but it all comes down to the last, I would say, step, or I would say that last step itself is a first step for me to understand, hey, how am I generating this service and providing this service, and how am I generating this product and selling this product?
It's funny. Everything has an AI label on it now in cybersecurity. I think the SEC recently called it AI washing. Yeah. And so it's really difficult for, I think for consumers, specifically cybersecurity teams, to know like what's real and what's not, right? I think, even, where I'm working today at Serbi, right? We've got elements of AI that we're building into the back end of the platform. But in terms of cybersecurity tools, right? When we look at what actually has AI in it or not, I agree with you that I think it could actually be both, right? Where you have a tool that has AI built into it that could be, and I don't think there's a whole lot of these tools. And again, we'll talk about tools in a minute. But what are you seeing today around that in the market? Is it mostly just AI washing, or do you think we're getting close to where we're going to actually start to see this in cybersecurity products in general?
I think in today's environment, it is still in a very, very early stage where I think most of the organizations who are either creating a product or a service and they are using artificial intelligence in conjunction to what they are offering, it can mean differently to different consumers. And it all again comes down to a point: what am I consuming this service for, and how am I consuming this service? How beneficial it's going to be for me to use some sort of an AI engine that comes with it as a feature functionality. Is it an add-on, or is it part of the DNA itself? And that's going to help me to become more efficient in terms of consuming that service. Am I going to get real-time benefits of getting a real feed to understand what my data set looks like, what my KPIs are defined by using this service, how I can basically, I would say, accelerate my processes by using a service that has a built-in AI engine. So it again is a very, very driven from what that service is all about and what a customer is using that for. Now, the other could be that, hey, we have AI being used in terms of automobiles today. So where you have the firmware and the operating systems that are getting more interactive, that's picking up what you are asking questions, or you are asking certain actions or events to be performed, and it learns from that and gives you the output, I would say, in a more proactive way. So that could be a beneficial for somebody who may be driving across East Coast to West Coast or West Coast to East Coast and wants to determine that, hey, based on my EV, where are the charging stations? Although it's there, but it can get interactive and say, if I deviated or detoured from a certain location, is it picking up the data points and then artificially calculating the distances, how much charge I have been left with, where is the nearest station, what kind of station is it? Can I get all those details proactively from the system? Now, again, it's a real-time, beneficial for some, maybe useless for some others. So it will come down to a point as to how we want to basically interact with the services that come with the DNA of AI versus a bolt-on AI feature and functionality on top of it.
Following up on that, I think, cloud, and now specifically LLMs, right? They devour, in some cases, petabytes of data. Let's talk specifically in terms of steps, right? Like, what steps do you recommend our listeners take to put a risk mitigation strategy in place that will scale, be responsive enough to act before an incident happens? And then the last, I think the kicker I'd throw on this, that can actually be done cost efficiently, right? Because we know the larger the data volumes traditionally, the more expensive it was to actually index that data and do something about it.
Yeah, I think with the cost of infrastructure becoming lower day by day, because you have, I would say, cheaper, ability to use the space in a cheaper way with the infrastructure as service providers available, it will come down to speed, accuracy, and automation. That is what it has to be. But however, what quickly will become a challenge is, while we at security and GRC professionals are being tasked to protect data, now especially with the LLMs being a high business priority, is that we are not getting exponential resources. So a strategy must consider how to leverage technology to keep data security protection costs on a linear growth versus the exponential growth we are seeing with data. I think what I want to add on to this one is speed, accuracy, and automation will also get complemented with people, process, and technology. Because at the end of the day, you may have how much ever automation, you may still need subject matter experts who understand the outcome of that automation, who understands the completeness and accuracy of what that automation will report, and the speed with which the calculations are being done, or the speed with which the analysis is being done, how accurate that is. So I think I still default back to my good old days that people, process, and technology remains still a key element that will be the foundation on which the speed, accuracy, and automation will sit.
I think the part that you mentioned on, cost efficiency, right? Because I think in your answer, you said something about, although the data is growing exponentially, security teams are not getting exponential resources. So it's not like if today I've got a couple terabytes of data, but by the end of the year, I expect to have, exabytes, right? With LLMs and things like that. A security team is not going to get 10, 15, 20 more people in order to deal with and to track that type of data. So the whole data security posture management space, DSPM, there's been a lot of vendors that have pivoted into that space. And on the surface, at least for some security professionals, they all look similar, right? If you look at their marketing, they look like they kind of all do the same thing. How, based on your experience, how do you recommend listeners quickly and effectively wade through this space?
I believe most CISOs and GRC leaders and I would say my peer group members have a large number of vendors that they already work with. We have seen that collapsing everything into a single platform is preferred. That means you have to have a very, very clear-cut ecosystem in which you want to operate, but not effective in producing accurate and timely results of data security. So the hyperscalers, the CNAP providers, and others have started to bolt on DSPM capability. But the cost, speed, and the scale doesn't match what most businesses really need. So first off, be ready to consider a best-of-breed approach for data security here. Considering newer companies and innovations that have been born in the cloud to address these cloud and Gen AI use cases. For example, in a few weeks, we will see the RSA Security Conference present its top 10 finalists for the Innovation Sandbox. There are some great approaches being highlighted there. I would start there, and look at, maybe an organization like Bedrock Security. In fact, in the top 10, you will see data security companies like Bedrock Security focus on a lot of these big data cloud and Gen AI use cases, which we have been discussing today as such. So I'm not saying that there would be one vendor to look into, but I think my peer group members would have a choice in their hand to pick the best of breed that's available, that's addressing their, I would say, immediate priority from a security best practice that they need to incorporate and implement. But at the same time, they also want to look at from longevity perspective. Like, you do not want a product to disappear once you make an investment and then suddenly these products are gone. Like, you don't want fly-by-night operators, but you want something that is going to give you return on investment for a longer term. Although, the space in which we are, the pace in which we are operating today, technology gets obsolete very quickly. So one has to be very prudent in terms of the investment that one needs to make in these kind of tools and technologies.
Yeah, and I'm a startup. I'm a startup guy. I love startup. Been part of multiple startups, and I think typically when I'm advising my clients through the work that I do with IANS, I always tell them that you of course you have the option of best of breed or working with the platform providers, and generally I tell them, if you likely already have platform agreements in place with the big players. If they have the tech that's already in their stack and it meets your requirements, go down that path, right? Because the TCO is going to be there. But there are going to be those edge cases, and I think data security is one of those where the big players likely don't have the same capability that these cloud native DSPM providers have today. And I think we're going to see another wave of consolidation in this space, just because, as you said, like the rate at which data is growing because of LLMs, Gen AI, and things like that, there's just certain tech that you can't continue to do it the way it was done even 5 years ago. It's just not there.
Yeah. there has to be a tech debt consolidation that will become now a routine exercise for most of the organizations who want to scale themselves and scale their business, riding the new bandwagon where artificial intelligence is going to play a very, very crucial role in terms of, the technology as such, and the kind of technology that generates tools, use cases, address the problem statements. It's going to be an interesting watch for next, I would say, I won't even say 10 years, I would say next 5 years at least in the data security space.
So let's switch gears. We've talked a lot about kind of the tech side of it. When it comes to personal growth, and this is kind of a question that I ask all my guests because everyone always has such a unique answer to this, but what's the formula that works for you? You've been in cyber for 20 plus years. You've been very successful. What's your personal growth formula?
My personal growth formula is very simple, Matt. Keep learning and keep listening. The more we listen, the more interaction we have, the more we can learn from the newer organizations, the newer technology that's coming up. We have to give opportunity to these startups to come and showcase what kind of problem statement are they solving for us. Because again, coming with the background of having seen the SAS 70s of the world, which was really, really old school. And now we talk about, the SOC 2 and SOC 3s. And then even the frameworks have evolved over a period of time. I think the technology is definitely going to challenge these frameworks, and the evolution of risk, the morphing of risk. So for an individual who wants to grow, it's very important to listen, interact with these young organizations that are coming up with newer tools and technology, and be humble about learning as such. I think we are in that school where there is no graduation. We got to keep learning. That's how I suffice my, I would say, intellect in terms of engaging, interacting, and learning from my peers or youngsters who are coming up with the latest organizations in the form of startups that are giving cutting edge tools and technology now.
Have you found it, and this is my experience, but I'm curious if you've seen it, but as you gain more experience in your career, right? We're both at that 20 plus year mark in cybersecurity. Do you find that you have to be more intentional about listening? I know from my side, I know I do, because there's a part of me that I just say, like, I already know this, and I have to actually be intentional and say, you know what, like, maybe I do, but maybe I don't.
That's where I use the word humble. You got to remain humble and grounded and listen. Doesn't matter if we know it, because there might be some element that could be newer, that could basically help us draw references and inferences to the experience that we have gained for 20 years and where the technology has come up now, and it's gonna be in the next couple of years. So that's how I kind of form that bridge between the two.
Well, are there any parting words that you maybe would have for our listeners, or perhaps something you wanted to share that I didn't ask you about?
I would say just keep it very simple. Our foundation elements in the world of governance, risk, compliance, and security still remain very, very solid. I think we are in the world where, yes, we want to be proactive and then react to any situation or events that may surface up. But I think the key is the foundation. Our foundation has to be very strong. So keep the subject matter experts closer to you so that you can learn and utilize their expertise and build stronger practices. That's the best I can say.
Ashish, thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely, pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode. To find out more, please visit us at cloudsecuritytoday.com.